Good afternoon, everyone. How is everybody today?
Doing well, thank you.
Good to see you. It's really nice to see some of you we know, and some of you are new folks for us and new partners for us. So welcome and thank you for being here. And we will continue to have people who will join us for the next few minutes as we get going. So I'm Joyce McEwen Crane. Welcome to our initial series of Rising to the Challenge, our initial talk, Leading Through Uncertainty, Crisis, and Change. And I'm joined here with Mary Montgomery. We are your technical folks for today. Hopefully everything will go smooth, but if you have any questions as far as being able to join the call, if you get knocked out of the call for some reason or have other technical questions, please let us know through the chat. We'd be happy to help you. And we are also joined by your facilitators for today, Howard Keim and Jessica Smith, and I'll let them introduce themselves here in just a minute. So as I said, you're in the first workshop of our 6-part series. And Mary, if I can get you to show the next slide, we'll look at, or the next 2 slides actually, we'll look at what that series is about. So you are here for Leading Through Uncertainty, Crisis, and Change. We have 5 more talks, and there are the titles of those talks. If you are interested in coming to any of those, we would welcome you to sign up, and we can give you those Zoom links if you are interested and didn't realize that there was more than today to attend. We have been overwhelmed and happily overwhelmed by our response to this workshop series, and we're really thankful for your support, both, like I said earlier, our long-term friends of CEI and some of those who are new to us. Mary, if I can get you to back up 1 slide for those of you who are not familiar with who we are. We are part of Wichita State University, and we are at the Community Engagement Institute. And our goal here is to promote best practices in organizations and communities interested in improving people's lives, as well as fostering connections with our community partners who are looking to create positive change. So that's a bit who we are. So right now I'm going to talk a little bit about the purpose of our series. We really do hope that this series is useful for you in not only bringing some education, helpful tips and tricks that might be useful for you, but we also hope it's a way to introduce us to you, a way to let us learn about who you are, and potentially create some partnerships that may be useful moving forward. And it's our way also of just providing service to the state by bringing some of our expertise to our partners. Given that we only have an hour, we'll move through the rest of this fairly quickly, but I do have some tips related to this series. So Mary, let's see if you can move 2 slides ahead. So we've all been living on Zoom a lot lately, but just some things to remember as we move forward for today. We will have you all on mute. And if you'd like to unmute to offer some comments or to participate, we would enjoy that. You may also use the chat to put any comments that you might have as we go along. And there are times that we'll direct you to the chat. That being said, for some of you, following the chat and following slides and trying to listen at the same time to facilitators gets overwhelming. And if you need to close the chat until you are instructed to use it, feel free to do that too. We're just fine with that. So don't be shy about using it and turn it off if it's not helpful. If you can have your video on, we love seeing you. It really does bring more energy to our facilitated talks. It helps us feel more connected to you and helps us kind of read each other better. So please try to have your camera on if you can. And we also understand that sometimes that's just not available for you to do. And then also, if you could rename yourself, if you're not showing the name that you would like to be referred to on your screen, then to rename, just hover over your box. You'll see 3 dots up in the upper right-hand corner. Click on that and then rename yourself so that we can call you by name when that may be useful. We are recording today's session, and we'll record all of our sessions and hopefully be able to post those links for folks who want to go back and capture some of the great information that you'll learn on the talk today. So today your facilitators are Howard Keim and Jessica Smith from the Community Engagement Institute, and I will let them introduce themselves. So I'll turn it over to Howard.
Good afternoon. I'm Howard Keim, and I am an associate in coaching and leadership at CEI. I'm a native of Michigan, and we have resided in Kansas now for over 30 years. We live in Heston. Over to you, Jessica.
Thanks, Howard. Hey, everyone. My name is Jessica Smith. I mentioned this in the chat, but I was scrolling through the participants, and it's really exciting to see so many names of folks that I know from all across the state of Kansas. That's one of the things I love about the work that I get to do with the Community Engagement Institute is meet people all over the state. And there are also a lot of names I don't know. So I am so excited to be here with those of you that I do and have met and haven't met. I work in our Center for Public Health Initiatives, and that looks like a lot of things, but I have particular passions in the areas of leadership development and workforce development with our Kansas public health workforce. And I also have a strong passion for rural Kansas and rural frontier Kansas. I was born and raised in a small county, a frontier county, Stafford County. So some of you probably go, oh, I know where that is. And there are others of you going, that's a place in Kansas. So I do love being able to work with all Kansans and all communities across Kansas. And I'm really excited to be part of this engagement because I get to meet new folks in the state of Kansas and even maybe outside the state of Kansas. So I don't want to hold us up anymore. I really just want to dive right in. Today, we're going to hit on 3 key areas. So first, we're going to spend just a few minutes with a little bit of grounding, thinking about what your experience for the past year has been around leading during times of uncertainty, crisis, and change. And then we're going to explore a few key leadership capacities to help you kind of ground in that space when you are leading during these times. And then finally, we're going to give you an opportunity to really process some of the information and think about what it means for you. So if you need that mental time to prepare, you will be placed into breakouts here toward the end, and you'll probably have to engage with some folks that you've never met before. So I just wanted to let you know that that will be a part of the session today. And also, as Joyce mentioned, there are several opportunities along the way to engage in the chat. So please do whatever is best for you so that you can engage. But we will be inviting you into the chat a handful of times during the next hour. All right, so let's start with this idea of grounding in the present. So leading during these times of uncertainty, crisis, and change. I think this is an experience that at some level, in some aspects of our lives, all of us, or most of us, can really align with, especially in the past year and a half. Oh, I'll have you pop back one more slide, Mary, thanks. So a lot of you have been looked to, whether it's in your personal lives or professional lives, to be in that place of making decisions, asking the right questions, helping make sure folks feel comfortable, the people around you, or just being a positive, active part of a team and a process that is trying to make progress during really questionable times. So sometimes all of that happening, given the big question marks that float around us, can make it really difficult to feel like we're grounded and we're having this sense of calm, confident, intentional decision-making as we engage in the activity of leadership. So acknowledging that, we really have selected 3 core competencies. We know that there are more ideas out there around leadership, but we're focusing in on 3 key areas that we think will really help you recenter and reground in leadership as you move forward doing the good work that you do. So to get us started, Mary, I'll have you go ahead and go to that next slide. In the chat, if you have it up, curious, using one word, summarize your experience of leading during 2021. I know that's broad. We're 10 and a half months in. So I'll hold some silence for about 20 seconds so you can reflect on that, and then start putting it in the chat whenever you're ready. All right, so that was 20 seconds. Keep them coming. I'm going to scroll back up because you all were ready to go there. I see exhausting, hectic, challenging, hilly. Oh, that's a fun word, Chris. Hilly, I like that. Innovative. Yeah, thanks, Daniel. Scattered, patience. Some more challenging, experimental, inconsistent, exhausting. Yikes. Determined. Yeah, I'm reading through these and I'm going, yep. I think at one point during the last year, I felt all of those things at some point or another. Draining, trying, absolutely. So we know that intentionally engaging in leadership might take some energy in itself. And then you add on the layers of doing that during times of uncertainty, crisis, and change. And that just adds more to that intentional engagement. And again, like I said, it can be tough to feel grounded, like we're making calm choices, asking those questions that might help us make progress, engaging with a group in a way that we feel like is meaningful and intentional. And it can be very difficult. And that's why we think, like I said, we're going to focus on these 3 areas of mindfulness, hope, and compassion. So I appreciate you all diving right in and reflecting on the past year. Now it's time to hopefully learn about some new ideas and think about what's next and moving forward for yourselves as you continue to engage in leadership. Howard, do you want to get us started talking about these ideas?
Sure, thank you. Thank you all for joining us today. This is an investment of your time that we want to be good stewards of, and hopefully you'll emerge with some ideas and thoughts that will help us navigate difficult times. I have a rather lengthy career in a variety of situations, and I'm currently doing a fair amount of coaching and facilitating and working with both nonprofit and for-profit organizations. I don't recall a time that has been more challenging than what we are in right now. And we all face tremendous pressures. Many of us are on this call because we're managing in some way or another. Some of us are CEOs, but most of us are not. Most of us report to somebody else, but we also have people who report to us, which means that we face pressure from both above and below and all around. And that pressure is real. And while we're in the midst of all of this, we need to be at our best. People need us to be mindful and hopeful and compassion in these areas. So we're going to explore these 3 concepts today. We'll see that they overlap somewhat, but hopefully we'll see some connections and ways that we can enact these things in our own situations. We will have stress even when COVID is done, or there will be some new kind of stress that comes our way. We can't manage everything in our environment. That's impossible. There are things outside ourselves that impinge on us, but we can manage ourselves. And that's really what this time today is about. Most of what I'm going to be sharing in the next few minutes comes from research based in the discipline of emotional intelligence. And there is a citation from Boyatzis and McKee, a book called Resonant Leadership that I'm drawing on fairly heavily today, and I'd like to give credit to that. During the time that we're exploring these three areas, feel free to use the chat and enter there your questions, your reactions, your responses as you wish. So first of all, we're going to begin by looking at this concept of mindfulness. This has become a very popular and much needed area of study over the last decade or so. What we mean by mindfulness is being fully awake and aware and attentive. Another way to say it might be that we would call mindfulness moment by moment awareness, being fully present with ourselves and with those around us. There are different aspects to this, and kind of a cascading way of thinking about it. First of all, being aware of ourselves, our own role in the situation, how we are experiencing it. What are our bodies telling us? What are our anxieties telling us? The stories that other people are telling about us as well are part of this notion of being fully aware of ourselves. And then being aware of our situation, how we got here, what we know for sure about our situation, and acknowledging what we don't know. Mindfulness also includes being aware of the future. What are some possible scenarios? What are some of the contingencies? What are some of the implications of what we might try? And then of the organization as a whole, what are some of our strengths? What are some of our vulnerabilities? What is the unique position that our situation offers us? And then from time to time, it's really important to stop and take stock of what we're learning. What do we now know that we didn't know earlier? And one of the most encouraging things to come out of COVID is to see the ways in which people are learning, the things that they are discovering about themselves and their own organization, and the ways that they're resilient. It's important to remember about mindfulness that it is contagious. People become more thoughtful and less anxious when we demonstrate mindfulness. I'll give you a quick illustration. In 1990, there was a tornado that came through our town. Our family was huddled in our basement. We heard what sounded like a train going over our heads. We came out eventually, and we saw the wreckage in our town. We didn't know if people were safe. We didn't know what all had been damaged. It took us a little while to regain our equilibrium. One of the things that helped us was that our mayor, John Waltner, early on spoke to the media from City Hall, and he told about what had happened, what we knew. He acknowledged what we did not know. He said who was coming to town to help. He said what we were going to be doing the next day. He encouraged us to come together and help each other. He projected this sense of mindfulness. He acknowledged what we didn't know. He didn't make up things we didn't know yet, but he projected this sense of calm and mindfulness, and it stood the town in good stead for the remainder of our recovery time. So take a moment in the chat, if you wish, and think about this checklist that is coming up in the next slide. And what comes to mind for you in terms of responses or questions around mindfulness? We'll allow a few seconds before we move on. Jessica, are you seeing anything in the chat you'd like to bring forward?
Not yet, Howard.
Okay. All right, well, let's move on then to the second area.
Oh, wait, I did see something come through that said they
Okay.
all start with I. Mary, do you want to hop back to that checklist slide real quick, just so folks can?
Mindfulness checklist, all of those start with I. Yeah. Self-awareness.
Also, another note that healthcare professionals often have the most difficulty with taking care of yourself.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
taking care of others, that you can be so busy taking care of others, it can be hard to take care of yourself. So this idea of mindfulness and starting with me can be difficult, especially for folks that might be in those healthcare professionals and those caring type of roles.
So moving on to the second area of hope. Hope is related to mindfulness and builds on mindfulness. Hope is feeling confident about a future that seems feasible. Feeling confident about a future that seems feasible. So there are different sources of hope. One is a realistic assessment. It's not pie in the sky. It's coming to terms with who we are and where we are and what is happening now. Realism breeds hope. So a realistic assessment of the current situation and whatever the future might entail. And then a sense of optimism, a picture or a story of a positive future, something that draws us toward the future. And then engagement of others. Leadership begins with me, and it must engage others. And then we put feet under that with a plan that seems to make sense. And then we add to that perseverance or steady progress through difficult issues. So back to use the tornado example, this idea of a realistic assessment, a sense of the damage that had been done, not only in terms of dollars, but numbers of homes, how many people had been hurt. Thankfully, in our town, no one had been killed, which was really very fortunate. But there was an assessment of the current situation, and then what we were going to do, how we were going to approach it. Every day you could show up at the school and you could be told where to go to work to help. There was a plan, there was something to do, we had a way to move forward. And then we kept at it, and we showed steady progress through time. The interesting thing about hope is that hope releases energy and resilience across the organization. Without a sense of hope, we lose our energy. We tend to withdraw, we tend to shut down. I had a wise mentor and supervisor once who introduced me to the 10-minute rule. He said, I've got 10 minutes. I said, what do you mean by that? And he said, when I get bad news, I give myself 10 minutes for a pity party, and after that, it's time to go to work. So that's a way to think about it. I get 10 minutes. I get 10 minutes, and then it's time to go back to work. So a suggestion would be, what can I do now to make progress? What can I do now in this moment or today to make progress and gain momentum toward the future? So again, take a look at this checklist that follows. Again, they all start with I, except for an hour. And again, use the chat if you'd like to register your questions, your responses.
While some folks are processing their thoughts and reading this checklist, I do see one note in the chat about, and it says, in my experience, leaders hesitate about being too honest in hard times, feeling like it will make the future seem too bleak. But without honesty, you can really dampen hope because your people know the present reality isn't being addressed. Thanks, Heather. We can give other folks that are still processing this checklist another minute to really think about what might be standing out to you.
Okay, we can move on then to the next area, which is this notion of compassion. Compassion builds on hope and mindfulness. Compassion has to do with empathy and caring in action. Empathy and caring in action. Compassion really starts with curiosity and with listening. We listen first to understand rather than to respond or to be understood. It's taking time just to be with other people, to understand the world from their perspective. Empathy means that we consider the experience and the perspective of other people. We cannot feel like other people feel, but as much as possible, we can put ourselves in their shoes and begin to see the world as they see it. Sometimes this means literally going to their workplace and spending time in the places where they spend time, with the people they spend time with, in order to really learn to know their world. That's at the ground level of all compassion. Curiosity, listening, and understanding. That's how we can begin to develop compassion and empathy. Compassion means that we speak to loss. It means that we acknowledge the pain that people feel or the difficulty that they're going through. And sometimes a simple acknowledgement is much more effective than a glossing over or pretending that it isn't really so bad. Usually it is bad and it needs to be acknowledged. Speaking to loss, acknowledging pain, and acknowledging disappointment. Compassion also means that people may experience things differently and may be interpreting things differently. So it means that we recognize the differences in the room or the differences in the organization. In the current situation that we're in, we've had different opinions about the pandemic itself, different opinions about how to respond to it, different opinions about how to even take care of our own persons, our own selves, and our families. Part of compassion during this difficult time is to acknowledge and recognize the differences that we have in these areas. And then to extend it a step further and practice everyday kindness. Simply being next to somebody when they're going through something difficult, offering to give a hand, picking up something and helping to carry it, acknowledging verbally what someone is experiencing, all of those things, just everyday kindness. The interesting thing about compassion is that it sets restorative processes in motion. I'm convinced that the expression of compassion does bring healing, mental healing and physical healing. Physical touch and emotional connection bring healing in very difficult situations. Compassion sets restorative processes in motion, both interpersonally and in families and throughout organizations. So what we want to project then as leaders in this area of compassion is a sense of empathy and respect and gratitude. In the area of hope, we want to project steadiness, progress, optimism. In the area of mindfulness, we want to project this sense of awareness or non-anxious presence, an acknowledgement that we are where we are and we will move ahead together. So let's explore this with the next checklist, give ourselves a moment or two to enter our thoughts in the chat. Feel free to respond to any of these in the chat.
Hey, Howard, do you mind saying more about the first item on the checklist and what that is?
Yes, I spend time in the Gemba. The Gemba is a Japanese word which stands for the place of work, the place where action is occurring. So if we are supervisors, we need to spend time in the Gemba where people are doing their work. In healthcare situations, that means spending time on the floor where clients and patients are being served. That's what that means.
Thanks for that clarification.
Sure, and one of the things we might, that this notion of what makes compassion so difficult is that it's hard work. It puts us through the ringer in some ways. That second note, I understand in my mind and feel in my body the variety of emotions at play in this organization. To fully embrace and enter into what is occurring in an organization is demanding. It's not easy work.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I've seen a couple of items come in the chat. One individual acknowledged that, looking at the fourth item on the checklist, that it's been critical to not only themselves but the entire team to remember that everyone is experiencing this time differently.
Right.
Absolutely. And then also acknowledging the emotional connection and physical touch have been more difficult in the past couple of years, but that doesn't make it any less important. Yeah, these are great thoughts. It's important to recognize and acknowledge that people are experiencing this time in different ways. So yeah. And then I got another agreed. So that one definitely seems to be standing out for folks there. And Daniel, you mentioned this reminds you of your lean training in healthcare. I don't think I know what lean training is. Do you want to say more about that in the chat, or even if you want to unmute just a second.
Sure, it's all about just being more efficient in healthcare. And like Howard mentioned, it's about being on the actual floor and observing what's going on when you're trying to improve different processes.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I appreciate you clarifying. Like I said, I was going to Google in my free time, but I appreciate that. Jennifer acknowledged that in however you choose to demonstrate compassion and empathy, it must be authentic, and you have to commit to it 100%. If it's not authentic and you're doing it to a check a box, or hey, look at me, I'm a great leader, because empathy, compassion, it will be obvious to those you lead that, and they may respect you less for it. And I got an agreement there. Yeah, and I see really great other thoughts in the chat. Thank you. I'll keep them coming. I'm reading them. I encourage you all to open up your chat and read some of those if you haven't had time to yet. But Howard, I'll give it back to you. Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. I was just going to add one item that I think is important in all three of these areas, perhaps most important in the area of mindfulness. It's really important that we give ourselves permission to set aside some time for ourselves, to catch up, to notice what's happening in our bodies and in our minds, and with our emotions. For some of us, that means a cup of coffee in the morning. For some of us, it means a glass of wine sometime in the afternoon or evening. Sometimes it means a 10-minute break over noon beyond our lunch hour. But we are probably, if we're going to be mindful and hopeful and compassionate, the main instrument that we have to implement that is ourselves. And so we have to take care of ourselves well enough to do that. Part of that means catching up with ourselves. And in the world that we're in, we have to give ourselves permission to do that from time to time. Okay, Jessica, I think you're going to take us through an exercise.
Yeah, thanks, Howard. And sorry, I froze for a second, and so I missed a couple seconds, and I wasn't sure if you were still going. Love slightly unreliable internet. So thanks everybody for engaging in the chat and thinking about and reflecting on those three key areas of mindfulness, hope, and compassion. As I mentioned, we are going to give you some time to process this with a few other folks and think about it. So what this is going to look like is we are going to send you into breakout rooms with 4 to 5 people, and you're going to answer just a few key questions. And the goal is obviously to make it through the different questions. But I would absolutely encourage you to start with 1 and 2. 2 might take a little bit more time. Mary, do you want to go to the next slide so we can see these questions? Thank you. So the first question is how can practicing mindfulness, hope, and compassion support leading during times of uncertainty, crisis, and change? And the second question, which is really 2-part, is of these, which of these capacities might be more difficult for you to practice? And then what could it look like for you to practice them? And you really just need to, you can pick one to focus on. I realize that those lists were amazing. Thank you, Howard. And there are several items there. I think I could probably pick a handful off of each checklist to focus on. So think about the things that stuck out to you. And then finally, if you have time, we want to give you an opportunity to think about what you do well and want to acknowledge. So this is your time to brag on yourself. And thank you for posting those, Joyce, in the chat. So when you go to breakouts, you should be able to open your chat again. Sometimes when you go to a breakout, it closes your chat. You just have to navigate back and click chat again. And these questions will be here. And you are going to be in breakouts for about, let's see, Mary, can we do 12 minutes in chat, or I mean in chat, goodness, in breakouts?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Before Mary sends you to the breakouts, does anybody have any questions about the ask ahead of you? Okay. Well, that be, I'm not seeing any. So Mary, if you want to send folks to breakouts, we'll give you your 12 minutes. And Mary, I don't know if you're seeing, but it looks like in room 7, there's a couple of folks that didn't join. So there's only a single person in there. You might want to move them to a room that has other folks. It looks like room 11 could use somebody else as well.
I got them in the room, one of the rooms with less people.
Oh,
So.
great. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for letting me know.
Folks that are still in their breakouts have just a little over 30 seconds before Zoom officially kicks them out. So if they're wrapping up conversation, we do have just a few more seconds for them to get back in the room. Okay. Mary, is that everybody back in the room? I think it is. Oh, I'm seeing Joyce nod her head. Thanks, Joyce. All right. Well, thank you all so much for engaging in that discussion. I hope that you either had a notepad up on your laptop or your computer or a scrap piece of paper, and you were able to jot down something that you might focus on and experiment with as far as what it might look like for you to practice one of those capacity areas. Real quick in the chat, for your final in-chat engagement, I know that depending on your group size, maybe you didn't get to question 3, and that's okay. But I would love for you to take a moment now and share with all of us in the chat, what's something you do well and you want to acknowledge? And if this is difficult for you, that's okay. And I'm sure you can name several things if you try. So we would love to see you brag on yourselves in this space. Yeah. Lending a listening ear, perseverance, very positive and able to share that with others. Absolutely. Oh, what a fun group. Everyone in the group felt like compassion was a strength, compassion to others. I annoy her very well. Heather, if you ask my boss, I think he might agree with you that I'm good at that too. Focusing on hope and silver linings. Thanks, Nikki. Mindfulness throughout the pandemic with staff. Yeah. Learning new things, holding space for your staff, being present. Yeah, these are great. Thank you so much. And even if you didn't put a note in the chat, take that time to reflect, because you all have strengths and areas that you can focus on and lean into while you think about what you what other areas you might practice to help you ground and engage in leadership during these times of uncertainty, crisis, and change. So we are getting ready to come to a time boundary, and I want to be respectful of your time because, as Howard mentioned, we really appreciate you all making the time to invest in yourselves, and through that, investing in the people that you work with and serve and care about. And we have an ending quote here, and it says, "The first responsibility of a leader is to define reality, and the last is to say thank you." So we thank you so much for your time today. And before I pass it back to Mary for any closing thoughts, Howard, I know this was a quote that spoke strongly to you. Is there anything else you would like to say about this quote for today?
No, it's one that I've carried with me for about 20 years now. Max Dupree was a CEO of a furniture company in Michigan. A wonderful man, wrote a book, one of my favorite books called Leadership Jazz. I'd highly recommend it. But this is a quote that I've often taken with me. And so always remember, say thank you.
Yeah, thank you all so much. All right, Mary, I will pass it to you to get us wrapped up. Again, thank you all today for being here. We really appreciate you.
Yes, thank you, Jessica and Howard, for an awesome presentation. And thank you all for joining us today. You guys were great participants. It was so fun to read your responses in the chat. I have put an evaluation link in the chat for you all to complete. So if you just click that link, you should be able to complete that. And I did want to let everyone know that our next session is going to be Monday, October 25th. And that is going to be on telling your program telling your program story through a logic model. We're very excited for that. Thank you again, Jessica and Howard, and thank you all.
Thank you. And Mary, real quick, I saw this earlier in the chat. Will these slides be emailed out to participants later?
I believe that's a Joyce question.
We are hoping that we caught the recording and that we can do so. So cross your fingers.
Okay.
Thank you, Joyce.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.